What this means in practical terms is that this hearing today was basically the opportunity for Trump's lawyers to defend their argument that they've already made to the court in print, that Trump's trial, federal trial for trying to overturn the election results, shouldn't start for another 2.5 years. It shouldn't start until 2026. Today was the hearing where they were going to defend that argument. Today, Judge Tanya Chutkan, federal judge in D.C., made clear they are not going to get their 2026 wish. But how she got there was kind of amazing. The judge, quote, "Now, I want to note here that setting a trial date does not depend and should not depend on a defendant's personal and professional obligations. Mr. Trump, like any defendant, will have to make the trial date work regardless of his schedule. If this case, for example, involved a professional athlete, it would be inappropriate for me to schedule a trial date to accommodate her schedule. The same is true here. Among other things, the public has an interest in the fair and timely administration of justice, as well as reducing defendants' opportunity to commit crimes while on pretrial release, and preventing extended pretrial delay from impairing the deterrent effect of punishment." Prosecutors then tried to sort of bolster that point from the judge. Ms. Gaston, the prosecutor, says, quote, "The defendant, formerly the senior most official in our federal government, is accused of historic crimes, attempting to overturn the presidential election, disenfranchise millions of Americans, and obstruct the peaceful transfer of power. There's an incredibly strong public interest in a jury's prompt and full consideration of those claims in open court. And there's also a strong public interest in a fair trial, which means we need to proceed to trial as soon as the defense can be ready reasonably. Because on a near daily basis, the defendant posts on social media about this case. He has publicly disparaged witnesses. He's attacked the integrity of the courts and of the citizens of the District of Columbia who make up our jury pool. And this potentially prejudices the jury pool. So under the Speedy Trial Act, Your Honor, we need to find a time for trial when, well, as soon as the defense can reasonably be ready." So that's the judge saying, listen, the public has an interest in a speedy trial here. There's the prosecutor saying, oh, yes, they do. When the judge, though, attempts to have a discussion about what would be a reasonable amount of time for Trump's defense lawyers to go through all the evidence, that was a very heated portion of today's hearing. The judge found herself repeatedly instructing Trump's lawyer basically to calm down. Quote, "Mr. Lauro, defense counsel, this is a request for a show trial, not a speedy trial. And I'm sorry, Your Honor, to suggest for a federal prosecutor to suggest that we could go to trial in 4 months is not only absurd, but it's a violation of the oath to do justice. And let me just go through this organized material." And then the judge interrupts. The judge, "Okay, let's take the temperature down for a moment here." But Trump's lawyer goes on. "Mr. Lauro, quote, for the government to suggest that I can do that in 4 months is an outrage to justice. That not once have they talked about justice in this case, not once. So this is what I have to do. Now, they can give me key documents. That's very nice of them. That's very kind of them. I'd like to know one defense lawyer in the United States that's going to rely on a government's proposal of key documents." The judge, "Mr. Lauro, as I said, let's take the temperature down." In the end, Judge Chutkan scheduled the trial for March 4th, not of 2026, but of next year. The judge says, quote, "The offense giving rise to this case occurred at the end of 2020 and the beginning of 2021. To propose trying this case over 5 years later risks the real danger that witnesses may become unavailable or their memories may fade. And while Mr. Trump has a right to time to prepare, the public has a right to a prompt and efficient resolution of this matter. This timeline does not move the case forward with the haste of the mob. The trial will start 3 years, 1 month, and 27 days after the events of January 6th, 2021. So March 4th. Jury selection begins. Here's one other thing that Judge Chutkan said today I think is worth noting and actually worth getting some advice about. The judge said today, quote, "I realize that Mr. Trump's criminal case in New York is scheduled for trial on March 25th. I did speak briefly with Judge Merchan, the New York judge, to let him know that I was considering a date that might overlap with his trial." So she's explaining the two sides why she's picking this date, noting that it's up against the New York date, but she says she's spoken to the judge. Interesting. I mean, Trump obviously has many trials coming up in the next year. There is that one in New York on dozens of state felony charges. There's also the classified documents trial in federal court in Florida. And prosecutors in those various cases may not themselves be talking to each other, but the judges apparently are talking to each other. Judge Chutkan saying in open court today that she has spoken to the judge, for example, in Trump's New York case, to give him a heads up, to help deconflict between at least those two trials. And while that might seem common sense, that's the first time we have seen anyone in any position of authority playing the role of air traffic controllers for all of these trials that are all going to be trying to land in the same year.